Welcome to the Lifestyle First podcast, discussing lifestyle medicine and making self-care as easy as 1, 2, 3. 1 question, 2 research reviews, and 3 actionable health tips, all centered around the Lifestyle First method, your blueprint for the 10 key routes of optimal health and happiness. And now your host, lifestyle medicine physician and coach, Dr. Alka Patel.
Hello and welcome to Series 7, Episode 7 of the Lifestyle First podcast. And the theme that we are focusing on today is why for your connections. And the one question that we're asking is, how can we create more compassionate communities? Now, to answer that, I am delighted to introduce you to my guest today, who is Dr. Julian Abel, TEDx speaker with his talk, Why Compassion Matters. Dr. Abel, he is a palliative care consultant, and over the last 10 years, he's become involved in building compassionate communities around people at the end of their life. And for the last 5 years, he's been working, combining compassion with primary care, with dramatic health outcomes. And he is now the director of Compassionate Communities UK, a charity which has been formed to build compassion in communities. So, Julian, a very, very warm welcome to you. And thank you so much for joining me today to share what really can't be ignored, can it?
Well, thank you for inviting me, and I'm delighted to be here. And I guess in a way, it's so much of this is about personal choice, about what we want from life, and I guess it's the reason for talking about it is to really try and point out that being compassionate is a really, really good idea. If you want to be healthy, if you want to live a long life, if you want to be well, it's all about compassion.
The word compassion, what is your working definition? Because it is increasingly hitting our lips and hitting our dictionaries, isn't it? So what is your working definition of compassion?
So it's an interesting one about words and definitions because it's how we understand things on a conceptual level. But in a way, human emotions don't fit into neat little boxes. And so it's really a symbol, but it's part of something broader, which is not just limited to compassion because it's interwoven with these other things. But on a really practical level, we know what it is to suffer ourselves, and we see other people suffer, and we know we don't like suffering. And so we kind of figure out that it's not nice for other people to suffer, but it doesn't simply rest there, because compassion, for it to be really meaningful, has to really take a grip in terms of action. It's not just that we see other people suffering, but that we really take action to try and relieve that suffering. But I think that it's quite a good way of thinking about it is to think, well, compassion at the very least is on the other side is an aspect of love, and that you can start including words like wisdom in there as well, and all the things that means. So rather than separating it off into a box, it's a kind of catch-all for our good qualities as human beings.
Yeah, I think that's so important, isn't it? Because you're right, we can get stuck with the definition of caring, suffering, alleviating suffering, but actually deeper than that seem to be so many other emotional aspects that tip into that we can find very naturally in our lives as well, can't we? So do you think compassion is a natural, innate tendency in all of us?
Right, you're going to have to stop me there now, because I can go on for a long time about this. But this is I guess a place to start to think about that, which is kind of easy for our reasoning mind to get to grips with, is actually around evolution. And human beings, we evolved in small groups of anything between 50 and 150 people. And we're talking over a kind of 1.5 million year period, rather than thinking about the last 10,000 years, which is a mere blink of the eye in evolutionary terms. And actually, we survived by helping each other out. So much so that if we became isolated or lonely, then that was a threat to our survival, from predation, from lack of food, from warmth, from not being able to bring up children, from like everything in that context. Is that loneliness is absolutely a key thing to avoid. And actually, when you then start to go, well, where did all that come from? And you look further back from an evolutionary perspective, what you see is that social behavior, particularly in mammals, is well established. But in fact, you can find elements of social behavior in all animals. And for your listeners, anyone who's watching on YouTube, I really recommend a film called My Octopus Teacher. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's, if you want to see a really good hug, you just see this octopus hug this man. I tell you, it's everywhere. Anyway, so then actually you can start looking at what is the evidence for social behavior. And when you look at the brain structure for human beings, is that what you see is that we have a kind of primitive reptilian brain, which does all the kind of housework of the body, eating, sleeping. We have on top of that, the limbic system, which is a mammalian brain, which is it's about social behavior, it's about emotions and memory. And then what you've got is the more developed human brain, particularly the prefrontal cortex, which sits right at the top, and the prefrontal cortex is here, which is all about the integrative stuff, the complex social behaviors, about imagination, about it has reasoning on one side and intuition and all of that on the other. And so when you start to look at it, when you're searching for it, you find that social evolution is fundamental to animal evolution, particularly to human evolution. And then you start looking at genomic pathways, you look at gene expression, you look at biochemistry, you look at physiology. When you look for it, it is absolutely everywhere. And it's the point about that is that social behavior, the heart of which is compassion, has an enormous evolutionary pressure. And what this means is that every single human being has compassionate potential. And furthermore, that we learn in schools, the phrase survival of the fittest. And that's some kind of British 19th century imperialist nightmare. Not invented by Charles Darwin, invented by a philosopher called Herbert Spencer, who coined the phrase, and it was really the start of of what's called social Darwinism, which has got, frankly, overt racist overtones. And it was all about how white European, particularly Western men, especially if you're part of the British Empire, you actually deserve to have more because you're so much more intelligent and clever than everyone else. And it's absolutely wrong. That survival of the kindest is a much better description. And that you can think that actually evolution didn't occur in individuals, it occurred in ecosystems. It's the interrelation of everyone growing together. So you've just asked the perfect question in my mind. Has everyone got compassionate potential? The answer is yes. And a huge amount of it, and you can find trace of it in our evolutionary biology.
So given then that it's so innate in us, Julian, that compassion is there, it's inbuilt into us, what do you think we are doing that's fighting against this? Because we're not seeing it widely in our communities, are we, at the core of everything that we're doing? We're fighting against what is core to our evolution. What is it that we are doing that is countering this?
I would take a different perspective on this, and I would say that we swim in a sea of compassion. That actually it's so close to us we don't notice it, but it's happening all around us all the time. When you and I are talking, we're being considerate to each other when we're talking. When we make someone a cup of tea, when we feed our children first, when we open the door for somebody, when we're down the shops and we just chat with somebody that we've not met before in a nice way, whenever we're considerate, whenever we're not thinking of ourselves first, we're being compassionate. And you could, a really good way of thinking about this is when you're a baby, you are totally helpless. You are totally reliant on everything and everyone around you. If you want food, warmth, love, being able to grow in a healthy environment, all of that is based on compassion, and without it, we die. And actually, that's that sense of that interdependence of everything continues into our adult life. Because when you start to think about it, that where does our food come from? Where does the water that we drink come from? Where's a nice environment in which we live? What about our friendships, and what about our romantic relationships and our life partners? All of these things are totally founded on compassion, that without them, actually we fade away and die. So much so that if it comes back to the loneliness question, if you're without it, your chances of dying increase enormously. It's totally fundamental to human health. And we're fed a story of fear. Fear invokes a kind of primitive part of the brain, which doesn't really help us be more compassionate. But actually, I think there's a really important part of the thinking about all of this, which is recognize that you are already really compassionate, every single one of us. How much it's developed is different between different people, but actually it is there if you look for it, but you have to look for it.
Yeah, I love that idea of swimming in a sea of compassion, actually, because again, it feels like all we've got to do is reach out and it's there.
Yes.
It's in your grasp, isn't it?
Reach in and it's there as well.
So that takes me to my next question then, which is then about self-compassion then, Julian. So when you're talking about compassion, which is that outward expression of caring and alleviating suffering and spreading joy and kindness and love and laughter, is the starting point for that? Has it got to be self-compassion, reaching in and giving yourself the care and the attention that you need so that you've got the enabler to swim through the sea of compassion?
So I heard a story today. I was chatting with somebody from Australia who is interested in the question of compassion. And we were talking about the importance of interdependence. And she was in the healthcare setting and it was conducting an examination of an Aboriginal man. And he couldn't speak a word of English, so they got an interpreter in. And she started to talk about self-care. What do you do for self-care? And he was really struggling to get what on earth that meant. And so she said, well, self-care, it's how you look after yourself. And he looked at her like she was nuts and said, pointed to the interpreter and said, that's what my community does. And so, but I think, so when you say the starting point, I actually think the starting point is not fixed in thinking about I care for myself and then I can care for my community. I think it's the other way around. But I think we have to be really pragmatic as well, because we are limited human beings. And that means that that we can be compassionate, and it's good to do it in small steps, but we have to realize we have limitations. And if you give everything away, you have nothing. so best keep some stuff for yourself, and that's not just physical stuff that you give away, because we gift who we are as human beings, but we have to have a time to regenerate. And I think it's really good to be really practical, pragmatic about it, and say we have to look after ourselves so that we can be effective and we can be compassionate. But when you give, what you get back is much more than anything you give. This is so deep in us that actually this thing about reciprocity is very primal.
Yeah, gosh, you really got me thinking there, Julian. Do you know what I want to touch on, though? Is just that word you mentioned before, which was fear, and what holds us back. I've had several conversations just this morning about self-esteem and self-confidence, almost holding people back, that fear of being able to give to the world because you don't feel so good about yourself. And I wonder what your thoughts are about self-esteem is not what's important, actually. Self-compassion is what's important in order for you to get beyond the fear. What do you think about that?
There's one of the things I've become increasingly interested in and looking at is trauma, and in particular, for anyone who's listening who really wants to find out more about this, there is a fantastic book called "The Body Keeps a Score" by Bessel van der Kolk, and he describes this process of what happens when we're traumatized. And I'll talk a little bit about what trauma is, because it's very relevant to what you're saying. But basically, as I was saying, we've got a reptile brain, we've got a mammalian brain, and we've got a human brain. And this mammalian brain, this limbic system, everything, all the messages from the body come up through the reptile brain into the limbic system. And our limbic system has to decide whether we are in danger or not. Because if we're in danger, we have to get the hell out of there, whatever it is. Anyway, but when the danger signals flash, what happens is that the evasive action takes place, and our ability to integrate what's happening in our lives becomes disordered and disrupted in all kinds of different ways, and affecting memory and a whole variety of different things. Now, you remember we were talking about being a helpless baby, and what we need is, just on a very simple human level, is that we need that love and affection, as well as nutrition and healthy environments. And with the atomization of communities, what's happened is that the way that we bring up children isn't always harmonious, and particularly that when we as individuals suffer from trauma, then we tend to replay those events in our minds, and they get handed down through the generations. And it's a failure to integrate traumatic events. And traumatic events in the context of, when you're thinking about self-esteem and self-worth and self-value, you're thinking about, what happened in your childhood. Did you get the love and support for you to grow in a healthy and nourished way on both physical and mental level? And so often, you look at the adverse childhood events, which are the traumatic events of childhood, which can go on for years and years. That what you can find is that these patterns of neglect, and never mind actual physical harm or emotional abuse or sexual abuse, neglect itself is one of the adverse childhood events. And what you find is that without that nourishment, we carry around with us this alarm signal that tells us that we need to somehow do something different. And what that doesn't allow us is a full development of who we are as human beings. So self-esteem is actually, to me, it's really a reflection of some lack of nourishment that we've carried through from our childhood. And of course, that compassion then is compassion is the healer to that lack of nourishment. And that includes ourselves, but for other people as well. And it's why, this thing about unconditional love that you get from your community around you, it's part of the reason why that's so healing, because you have a sense of value and meaning and worth that is reflected through the eyes of other people. So I think that there are things that you can do around self-esteem which are really helpful. One is to really kind of sift through what's happened to you as a child and understand whether you got the nourishment from your parents that make you feel like you're a whole human being. And the other, another thing you can do is look at your existing relationships. Are they nourishing relationships? Are they simple but good and healthy? Do you get that sense of love from the people around you? And then you can think about that, in context of self-worth, what's really meaningful in your life, and what's really meaningful. Part of the kind of weird direction that we've developed in Western culture in particular is we think meaning and worth is all about wealth, and we think that wealth is all about money, power, fame, success, all of that. But I tell you, it's not. And if you want to find some unhappy people, go and find some wealthy ones. They have profound disquiet about them. But when you look at close-knit communities where people value each other and look out for each other, then you can definitely think of wealth being in the context of the relationships that you have. So I think there's something about shifting our focus away from thinking that self-esteem comes from being rich and famous and beautiful and all of those things, and thinking about actually just being a good human being is where wealth is.
Yeah, absolutely. Echo all of that. It's just a reset, reframing of what does success mean to you? What does give you comfort? What gives you meaning? Absolutely. And taking some space to have that slightly introspective view and giving yourself an opportunity to answer those questions that often we just don't give ourselves a chance to look into, do we? We just carry on living our lives in the way that we've become accustomed to. So important. Thank you so much for that, Julian.
And now, here is your lifestyle first prescription. Your 3 activating actions to take you from knowing to doing.
Just zoning in on compassionate communities, can you give us 3 ways that we can actually start to build this around us, that wraparound sense of a compassionate community? Where do you start?
So the place to start is what we were talking about, is recognize that you're already compassionate. And sit down and take some time and have a think about it and see where you are swimming in that sea of compassion. And then, if you feel inspired and you want to think that being more compassionate is a good idea, then actually just do little things, take little steps. Like when you go down the shops, do you know the names of the people in the shops? Do you chat to them? You see them again and again. Do you know the names of your neighbors? This thing about don't look over the fence, look over the fence. Ask your neighbor how they are, give them a cup of tea, just like small acts of kindness in very manageable ways. If you're taking your kids to the same sports club, chat to the parents and have a nice time and introduce yourself. And there are just in your daily life, it's very easy to be just a little bit more compassionate. And you might be motivated to do things for your community. And I think there's a good way of thinking about this. And that's thinking about if you think about a forest. Now, a forest, if you look under the ground of a forest, what you see is that on a physical level, the trees are completely interwoven. Their roots just move around each other. But and you can think that the stability that interweaving gives the trees is enormous. You've got this web which can could go over hundreds of miles. But it's not just the physical structure. trees actually nourish each other. So the strong trees will give nutrients to the weak trees, and that process can reverse. And actually, it's all about the interconnectedness. And if you think about the trees, that the trees are there. There's not just one tree. If you just have one kind of tree, the wildlife dies. But if you have all the different kinds of trees, then what happens is that they nourish each other and the wildlife flourishes and everything works in this kind of ecological perspective. It's the same with human beings. And that we can think about how we nourish each other as human beings. What can we give? What have we got that we can give? And our gifts are unique. And it might be that we smile a lot, which is a gift. It might be we sing. It might be we sew. It might be we're good at running. Our gifts are anything. What is the gifts that we can bring to our community that our community will appreciate? And then you can think about, okay, what are the gifts that other people have around them as well? And how can that be shared? And if you think about that, you think about that connectedness, this begins to look like the forest of strong roots that are intertwined, where everyone nourishes each other. And the research evidence is really clear. If you want to live long, healthy, happy lives, it's all about relationships. So go for the relationships. Yeah. That's much more powerful than giving up smoking, drinking, diet, exercise, and anything else you care to mention.
Yeah, that's that Holt-Lundstad study, isn't it? Which is just the numbers on there they speak volumes, don't they?
They do.
Absolutely. So I will not be able to walk through a forest in the same way again, Julian. You guaranteed that.
Absolutely not. No, good. Delighted to hear that. And you've got a picture of a tree right behind you, and that's a perfect thing to have.
Thank you so much, Julian. I'm sure people are going to want to find out a lot more about your work and the work of connected communities as well. So what's the best place to reach you?
So we have a website called Compassionate Communities UK, and I do a podcast as well called Survival of the Kindest, which is very broad-ranging. And you can find me on Dr. Julian Abel on Twitter. And so, or you can just look up Compassionate Communities UK and you'll find us. And, make contact. We'd be delighted to hear from you.
Amazing. Wonderful. Thank you. I'll get all those links up onto the descriptors so people can really access all the incredible work that you're doing. Just sowing those seeds, keeping with the forest analogy, sowing the seeds of compassion. Thank you so much, Julian. Wonderful. So any final words before we say goodbye?
No, just remember that you're already compassionate.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Which really simply leaves me now to draw the episode to a close and wish everyone a happy, healthy day.
Thanks for joining us on the Lifestyle First podcast, making self-care as easy as 1, 2, 3. Don't forget to subscribe and share, and we'd love it if you'd be kind enough to leave a review. To learn more or to arrange a consultation, please visit www.dralkapatel.com. See you next time.